Greetings, everyone. Good morning. It's always a sign that we had a good time last night when we start a few minutes late, I think. So let's go with that. I realized last night when I stood up here, I didn't introduce myself for those who don't know me. For some folks who've been around for a long time, I'm Liz Seaton, or even if yesterday was your first day with the Fair Courts field, I'm Liz Seaton. I'm the Deputy Executive Director of Justice at Stake, soon to be the incoming temporary interim Executive Director of Justice at Stake. We'll be running a nationwide search, which hopefully soon we will get you a position description for our Executive Director job as we look for the next leader of the organization. But I'll be leading the show for a few months. And thanks to everybody who came today. And here's my public service announcement that I'm supposed to start with. Found one of the Justice at Stake red conference bags containing a blue umbrella and Sherman and Sterling pad. If anybody here is missing that and wants it back, it's not here because that person is not here at the moment, but if you talk to the registration desk, they will arrange to get it for you. Any other public service announcements I'm missing? Somebody's going to cue me that. So thanks so much for being here this morning for the second day of our Fair Courts Summit. And I want to, yesterday was a super interesting day. I went around to all the rooms, and my goal in the morning was to come up with like the top 5 pithiest things that people said. Okay, then it was the top 5 most important things people said. Then it was the top 5 most interesting things people said. Then it was the top 5 calls to, you know what I realized? There were so many brilliant conversations. This was completely impossible. So I stopped trying to do that. And I realized that for this morning, getting started, one of the things I realized as I was traveling around the conference yesterday was that this work is so interesting. It takes the following, as I was listening to everybody talk about all of our work: a magnifying glass and a megaphone, a pen and paper, and the flexibility to work anywhere in the country or in the world from the cloud, a keen eye for policy detail and data, and the ability to paint the big picture, the fierceness to debate opponents, and an open heart that draws in new allies, the willingness to repeat ourselves over and over again on message to new audiences, the resources to support critical programs, and the ability to do a lot with a little, a picture of a better future and a plan on how to get there, the commitment to work for what is right for the long term in the interests of this country, but the most important thing of all is to be able to do all of this work with great people. At this summit, there are great people. And listen, I'm a super big introvert. I love to sit with my best friends. I'm not kidding, I really love that so much. I want to encourage you to get out of your comfort zone and sit today with people that you don't know and work with every day. Because one of the most important opportunities when we all get together is the opportunity to get to know people that we don't know, and a chance to make a connection with them that will help us work together in the coming months and years. So with that, I will introduce our first session. Okay, hold on. Our moderator is being mic'd for our first session, but I will introduce her, and then she'll make a wow appearance at that moment. The moderator for our first session, which is about building legislative champions, is Tanya Clayhouse, who is the director of the Public Policy Committee Public Policy Department at the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights under the law. We've had a long relationship with Tanya, and I've known her for a long time in various roles that she's held here in Washington. She used to be on our Fair Courts Advisory Committee, and she's a wise and trusted advisor today, and she's going to moderate this panel for us. And one of the things that we know that we need to make progress, especially for proactive victories in the Fair Courts field, one of the things that we know we need is to build more legislative champions. You know, in all of the states where either we're on defense or we're on offense, they're critical. They're just critical players in the policy work. So this session is really about that. And look, arriving like a rock star. The moderator for our first session, Tanya Clayhouse.
Great. So are we? All right, so I understand that you all were stalling slightly so I could get through and park. So I appreciate your, Liz doing that. Once again, my name's Tanya Clayhouse. I am the Policy Director at the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law. It's a pleasure to be here today. I always enjoy working with Justice at Stake, and as I said, we work together on a variety of issues, and it's interesting that we are, it's great that we have this opportunity again to do so today. As indicated, I'm going to be moderating your panel. We've got a great set of panelists here today. We're going to be talking about, how it is that we identify and cultivate judicial reform champions, which I think we all know is not always the easiest thing to do, especially when there's so many other issues that are happening across the country. But I think it's a great opportunity for us to learn from each other, learn which best practices do work, and figure out how it is that we can capitalize upon those as we move forward in our respective areas. So without further ado, because I know that we have a short time here, I'm going to do a brief introduction of each of the panelists, and then I think what I'm going to do is allow there to be maybe a couple of minutes of kind of initial remarks that each would like to give, and then I'm going to go right into some questions and provide some opportunity for, I think, are we going to allow audience participation? Okay, good. Awesome. So, as she just said, you write your questions on the note cards, and then we're going to allow for some questions from the audience. So, first, and I think that we're in order. Yeah, because you're the only woman on this panel with me. So, so first we have Melissa Price Kromm, who is with the North Carolina Voters for Clean Elections. She is the director of North Carolina Voters for Clean Elections, and which is the leading voice for returning power to citizens and lessening the corrosive influence of special interests in state politics. Ms. Kromm serves as a lobbyist and leader of a 35-plus member coalition, which helped pass North Carolina's voter-owned public financing for select judicial and council of state races, as well as the pilot municipal program. Before joining this organization, Ms. Kromm was part of a successful effort to pass same-day voter registration early voting sites in North Carolina. So please welcome Ms. Melissa Price Kromm. I'm going to do quick introductions of everybody first so that we don't have to keep going back and forth. So I'm sorry for that. Next, we have, well, no, we're not in order. Okay, so. Next, I have on my list Senator Jessie Ulibarri from Colorado, and he is the principal of movement building for Wellstone Action. In this role, he designs and delivers technical assistance programs for leading C3 and C4 civic engagement organizations and develops political leadership from diverse communities. He currently works with frontline groups fighting for economic, racial, and social justice throughout the country. Please welcome Senator Jessie Ulibarri. Last but not least is Mr. Ryan Wright with Kansas Values Institute and Kansans for Fair Courts. Mr. Wright leads the Kansas Values Institute and Kansans for Fair Courts, which brings together policy and opinion leaders to advocate and educate around issues like funding public schools, building safe roads, and protecting the Kansas court system. The group also seeks responsible tax policy that does not disproportionately impact hardworking, low, and middle-income Kansans. Please welcome Mr. Ryan Wright. I said, and so we're going to start with Ms. Kromm. So we're going to give initial remarks, and then we're going to go into a few questions. So.
Absolutely, thank you for having me. So I think what Jessie wants us to do is go through kind of the different phases of how we build these judicial reform champions. And starting with phase one about how the pre-work of what the advocates need to do to get where they need to go. In North Carolina, our work started in the 90s with an organization called the Institute for Southern Studies that was doing a lot of really great investigative journalism work. Their director, Bob Hall, was, realizing, I can't win on these labor issues, these voting right issues, these environmental issues that I'm reporting on. What can we do to get there? So he broke away and created an organization known as Democracy South, which is now Democracy North Carolina, which worked with groups like the League of Women Voters and Common Cause to found the North Carolina Voters for Clean Elections in 1999 to build the coalition needed to tackle these issues and to bring them in front of the legislature. And what we did was we did great grassroots campaigns and coalition building. One of them was known as the Penny Campaign that the League of Women Voters created, where we literally just took pennies and glued them and made them into pens, and we realized that it would only cost a penny per person per day to have full public financing in North Carolina from dog catcher to governor. And we wore these pennies around, and people would be like, "Why are you wearing that penny?" And we're like, "Well, let me tell you about how great public financing is," and started really building that grassroots support. And starting with those low-hanging fruit groups like Common Cause, League of Women Voters, and slowly building out our coalition. Next, we realized, we really need some good unlikely allies to go to the legislature with. And so from there, we built an organization or a campaign called the Campaign Donors for Campaign Reform. We literally went to the big money campaign donors who were sick and tired of being held for ransom every election cycle with increasingly larger demands on what they needed to be giving the candidates, and said, "Hey, do you want something better? Do you want better reform? Well, hey, come support us and let's talk to our legislators about passing public financing." So from there, we worked with an ally that we had been building up who really supported a lot of our progressive issues, former U.S. Senator Robert Morgan, who was the founder of the North Carolina Center for Voter Education. And he was a small town lawyer, knew a lot of people across North Carolina, got a hold of the Bar Association mailing list, and we mailed out letters to every single member of the bar saying, "Hey, as a lawyer, aren't you sick of having to, fork up all this money, and don't you want to support fair and impartial courts?" So we got them to join us and support us, mail back, and we called up those lawyers and said, "Hey, let's do some direct advocacy at this point, because the legislature is really starting to build and understand that there's a multifaceted campaign out there that really supports public financing." And this is 2002. There's a lot of support for public financing. The legislators are thinking, okay, well, what can we do at this point? Well, we don't really want to do public financing for us. Let's go dump it on the judges. And so, that we made that, compromise. Okay, well, let's do judicial public financing. And so, this is how we go into phase 2 and talk about approaching the legislators with a plan and a support. You have to first of all understand that your legislation is going to be a political football, and you have to understand how to maneuver within that system. That's why we knew when we couldn't get legislative public financing, we needed to move over and accept the compromise of judicial public financing. We had draft legislation and ideas prepared, and we went to our legislative champions and was, okay, you're going to use up all your political capital to go to the leadership and demand that we pass judicial public financing. We're going to have your back. We're going to have a media campaign ready. We're going to have letters to the editor in your district. We're going to give you the support that you need to back this. And that moves into phase 3. Once you've got your legislation passed, you need to understand that you need to award your friends, your legislators and your coalition partners who really stuck up and helped get this passed. You need to continue to build your coalition and with new and unlikely allies, and continue doing small incremental change. And we went through and started building a Council of State Public Financing and municipal public financing over the years. We also were really great about highlighting the program's success. We produced a judicial public financing profile every year of what it actually accomplished. We encouraged the use of the program, not only just by talking about the use of the programs by getting the candidates involved, but also going out there and encouraging people to engage in small dollar donations. And we even took pamphlets to auditors around the state saying, "Hey, talk to your clients about this $3 checkoff that goes into the campaign finance fund. You need to know that over time, the funding will be an issue, and that you need to ensure that you have adequate funding. that will last over time. So we had to go back in there and add a $50 attorney's fee to the program. You know, that was a kind of easy sell because no one has a problem with charging attorneys. So we pulled that together. And so we kept being adaptable and kept working. And, you know, I know that's for some people the last phase, but in North Carolina, we have a fourth phase, which was the defense of the program. And, you know, we pulled out a lot of the tools that we used in the beginning to put forth the program. We pulled back open the Campaign Donors for Campaign Reform campaign. We called up our friends and said, hey, you know, our program is on the line. You know, we could lose this. Can you call up and can you support us? We pulled together a letter of these, you know, lawyers from across the state, or some of them were just, you know, big civic and business leaders. These are the people who go golfing with our legislators. They're the people who they sit next to in church. And these are the people that, you know, quite frankly, our legislators are going to listen to. And we pulled together a letter of all of these who's it's and what's it's, and we brought it to the leadership. We're like, guess who supports judicial public financing? We also worked with the Council Court of Appeals judges, and this you have to be really careful with because judges, you know, don't want to look like they're coming out straight up with, you know, a policy proposal. But we talked to them and said, you know, this is on the line. We desperately need your help. And independently, the Court of Appeals judges in North Carolina, 14 of the 15 of them signed a letter and brought it to the legislative leadership saying, please do not kill this program. And where's my friends from West Virginia? Julie Archer, you got to work with your other states. Julie has been working with judicial public financing, and she has some great Republican leaders in West Virginia. And I'm like, Julie, do you think you can get me some Republican leaders to come down and talk to our Republican leaders about judicial public financing? So she gets the McCuskey's father and son team to go down to North Carolina, talk to our legislative leaders about let's save this program. Working with our state partners and helping each other out is incredibly important.
So that's great. Thank you. And I think next, why don't we go to, since I just went in order, kind of based upon the bios, I'll go to Senator Ulibarri to kind of give us an overview and a few remarks as well. And like I said, then I want to get into a few questions.
Great, thank you, Tanya. I'm wearing two hats today. First, as a state senator in Colorado and chair of the Senate Democratic Caucus there, and also as someone who came from the public policy world. Immediately before running for office, I was public policy director at the ACLU of Colorado. And so I am a bit of a legislative strategy snob, both because I was an advocate and now I'm a legislator. And when we talk about building legislative champions, I've held both seats of thinking through the strategy from outside the building and then also being inside the building and realizing the things I thought as an advocate sometimes worked wonderfully well and other times were asinine. And so my comments are colored by this worldview of both being a legislator and being an advocate. And my day job outside of the legislature is I work with coalition partners in this room and throughout the country to actually develop strategy and win. And so our focus, I think, for this panel today is to have the very blunt and real conversation about what works in developing a champion, what should you do, and what should you avoid. And how should a relationship be built? Because I think that's the essence of this work. It's not just a political tool for a moment in time for one legislative session, but I think what you'll hear from myself and from the other panelists is that this is long-term relationship building that actually can be transformative in your state, not just on this issue, but many others when we're talking about an open and fair democracy.
Well, that was great. Thank you. And Mr. Wright.
Yeah, thank you. And so, as I said to some of my colleagues from Kansas, it's that awkward moment when every time the panelists do a shout out to Kansas, it's for something bad. So, but the reality too is, from a legislative perspective, we're also a little bit like a unicorn. There's no mold. We've broken that mold, and we've been able to think outside of the box and really pull together some legislative coalitions and some external coalitions that have not only helped the judicial work, but as Jessie said, because that trust, because those partnerships have been made, we've been able to take that outside to other issues. And so what I'll talk about is how we've done that, how some of those challenges have come, and I'm happy to, we'll answer lots of good questions at the end of this. So.
Thank you. So we've heard Melissa talk some about how it is you develop the coalitions, but I want to go back a little bit about, and you went through kind of the whole process of what you've gone through in North Carolina. I want to go back, and if each of you can kind of address this issue about, first, after you're deciding, okay, this is how we're going to pursue this particular campaign, how do you identify what type of, which legislator you're going to go after? And particularly, Senator, you said you have that, obviously, that unique perspective of being on both ends. But I'd like to know how it is that you have, kind of how you went about that process in your respective states.
Well, in North Carolina, one of the places that we started with Republican legislators who work in the legal field because they really do understand the need to protect our courts. And so being able to start with them and to have those, conversations with them. And then obviously, going to some of the districts where maybe it won't be so difficult for them to stand up and to talk about judicial public financing.
Mm-hmm. That's good.
So one of the things that, when being from a small nonprofit, I'm sure as a lot of you can recognize, I do this in my head. I'm like, okay, so this is how we do this strategy. And one of our coalition partners finally said to me, we've got to get it out of your head and onto paper so we can translate this to the rest of the coalition. And that was kind of an early aha moment for me. And then Wellstone was like, we have a power map. We can do this. There's an app for that. And so, even though it's not an app, but but what we did was we literally laid it out there, and not unlike what happened in North Carolina, we started with the Republicans and then built out from there. In Kansas, as some of you have already heard me say, not every Republican is created equal. So we've got what we call moderate or traditional Republicans, social conservatives, and Tea Party Republicans. And once we understood that landscape, we could start navigating within those lanes to form some of those non-traditional partnerships. And so that was really key, but it was early on identifying that and then being able to communicate that back to the rest of the coalition, which is critical.
And I think both as a legislator and as an advocate, I was sitting in the room when folks said, Ryan, we need your knowledge on paper and on a map. And in Wellstone, we actually train how to map power relationships on an axis so you understand who has institutional power to move an issue and who has the ability to support you and who's opposed to you, and what do those forces look like in play when you're actually moving a legislative campaign forward. And it's something I've done professionally as an advocate and also as a legislator. And I think it's incredibly important to map out those relationships and the understanding of power on a grid. So you're actually seeing this person is strongly in support of me, they are likely to move this agenda with me, and they have the power to do so. Or potentially saying all of our advocates in the legislature have no institutional power. And I think that's where I realized that many of my strategies as an advocate were disconnected from the lived reality inside of the building, where we would say that person is always in the paper talking about this issue. That's the person we want, right? That's the champion, that's the voice of truth. And sometimes that's not the most effective person inside the building, and maybe it's not the person you need to move your issue forward. And that's a tough call to make. I think what it means is that you're actually looking at the current reality in your state, and you're asking the question, who has the power to move my agenda, and is that person supportive? Two very simple questions. And if the person who's in power is not supportive of your work, you have to figure out, is there another path? And I know a lot of folks, because of our work and because things are rather hierarchical in state governments, it's you have a speaker or a president and that's the person who makes decisions, quote unquote. That's not how it works at all inside the building. There are people who hold institutional power, knowledge, can move a speaker or president or a joint budget committee chairman because of the relationships that they hold. And so it's about mapping out and understanding how are these individuals connected, what brings them together, how are they aligned, and then how do those interests align with the coalition or the issue we're working with. And so I think that process has been transformational for me as an advocate and as a legislator, because I can look into a legislative chamber and see a very different path or opportunity than others. Although I'm only 3 years into my first Senate term, I'm already chair of the Senate Democratic Caucus. And it wasn't because of luck, it was because of strategy, planning, and working with coalition partners outside to say, if we're gonna set an agenda, how do we actually build up power inside and outside of the building to move on the things that we care about?
Let me just expand upon that a little bit, because I know, obviously there is similarities in as we're trying to develop legislative champions, both on the federal level and the state level, but you're right, there's unique dynamic that occurs within the state level. I know oftentimes on the federal level, when we're trying to figure out these champions, you're right. There are those that are out there talking all the time, like you said, but they are known differently inside. So that's just putting it politically correct way. And so we have oftentimes in our coalition building had to say, okay, how do I maneuver this so that they're also not taken aback that we did not come to you first? But we really need somebody else to kind of be that major co-sponsor. And I don't know if that's come up in your, in some of the work that you've been doing, but I'm just curious, how have you dealt with that? I know oftentimes we deal with it by saying, okay, you're going to be you've got so much on your plate right now, wink, wink. And we really need you to focus on these other bills, and we want you to be a part of this. But I don't know, I'm just curious whether or not there has been a different kind of path that you all have taken.
I'll say from my perspective, the way that I've dealt with that as an advocate is generally saying, we need your insight, support, and strategy on this, and we recognize that there's a unique political moment. And so sometimes that's an acknowledgement for that person, and you can do it kind of in a slow touch way that builds up, that we need your brain to understand what's happening inside the building, and an acknowledgement that maybe we need additional support. And I think a way to couch that is saying that this is a larger movement, and we need more than just one person championing our cause. We need as many people at our side on this issue as possible. And I think a way to do that well, and it's something I've been doing more frequently, is taking legislators and advocates and putting them in a room together to actually draw out a power map. Because there are perceptions from the outside about how things work, and then there are perceptions internally about how things work. And sometimes those two conversations happen concurrently, but never together. And so pulling those folks in the room, you can actually say, we're going to draw on your expertise. We want to use your knowledge about this issue and about the institution you serve in, and we need to develop other champions. Both can be true. And I think if legislators, because we all have huge egos, feel included and feel acknowledged that we're contributing something, it doesn't necessarily matter that we're not the person with our name on the bill, but we are sitting at the table trying to help drive strategy. I think there has to be an acknowledgement from advocates, though, that you invite that person in to be helpful in that space, and you have to be willing to drive the conversation as an advocate, so legislators don't say, well, this is my thing and this is how it's going to be run.
Does anyone else have any comments?
Yeah, I think so. In Kansas, the court issue merit selection is so intertwined with our education funding case. And so one of the big challenges we had early on was how do we get teachers to care about how Supreme Court justices are picked, and how do we get attorneys to care about school funding? And those were some very dicey conversations initially. And once we made it through that, it really freed us up to, we built that trust, we built those bridges, and it really freed us up to start having some larger conversations. But one of the other things that we did very early on, I believe in, I don't need to have my name on things, I just need to get the ball moving. And that was kind of the conversation we had at one of the very first initial coalition meetings. Is we were like, okay, are we going to publish who all the members of our coalition are? And we decided early on, no, we're going to call it Kansans for Fair Courts. And even though there are 20 to 30 entities underneath of that, they don't appear, but everything's coordinated on the back end, so that when we need a nonpartisan voice, we can call the League of Women Voters and say, we need you to do this. If we need legal experts, we can call our friends at the Kansas Association of Justice or the Defense Council or the bar. It allows us the freedom to move within those lanes in a way that is not always available because egos are involved. I'm not saying I don't have one. I'm not saying that our coalition partners don't have one. But the situation in our state is so critical now, we don't really have the luxury of having egos.
I agree with what Jessie was saying. It's stepping into that legislator's office who is your champion and saying, we really want this bill to pass. We know you're our champion, but who is the right legislator to carry this? And can you help us build that relationship and get this moving?
Okay. And could you expand? I want to delve into a little bit about some of the coalition building you're doing outside as well. And Melissa, you spoke about how you were developing a lot of, or working with organizations and even out of the state to kind of support your cause. And I'd love to hear a little bit more about that. I'd like your story, and if we could talk a little bit about that as well, as to how it is that you're building that coalition, working, as you said, Ryan, with trying to bring the lawyers and the teachers together, which are not mutually exclusive. I'm a lawyer, but also have a mom as a teacher. You know, we like each other some levels. And so, but if we could talk a little bit about that and how it is you've developed those relationships.
Absolutely. So in North Carolina, what we've done over the last 15 years is building these coalitions. We understand that it's not a one-way street. That is, you know, there is some quid pro quo here. There is you scratch my back, I scratch your back, in the sense of, our partner with the Center for Responsible Lending, they're getting attacked on payday lending. Well, they come to a coalition meeting and talk to us about this because they're worried. Well, we've got some great watchdog reporters in our Good Government group. Let's see what we can do to help you out. Let's go find all those loan sharks that have been giving to the legislators, and let's build you a report so that you can take it down to the leadership and say, if you don't stop this payday lending bill, we're publishing this report. So, having that kind of relationship being built, and sometimes it's not even as complicated as, doing an entire research project and, building a whole report. Sometimes it's just getting in your car, driving, halfway across the state to a AFL-CIO pancake breakfast and saying, I'll help you serve pancakes if you give me 2 minutes to talk about how great public financing is.
That works. Get some pancakes as well. Right.
That's true. There's a lot of these conversations and long road trips. One of the key things that we utilize is the communication side of things. I mean, the truth is, for most of our coalition partners, they don't have the capacity to message things, and frankly, there's a lot of them that don't have the capacity to have people in the State House. So we really serve as a key, I see us serving as a key connector between those different worlds and packaging things so that we can send it out to those coalition partners so that they can then send it out to their folks. And again, early on, when we first met, we're like, we need a list. Everybody needs a list. Like, give me your list. We decided not to do that. And so what we did instead was we gave them the information, allowed them to repackage it and brand it with their own stuff. And then we have naturally, over time, gotten those folks from their list that are very interested in the court issue. And so, instead of going to them and saying, give me your list, which is a threatening thing, usually people are like, we guard that with our life, we've been able to go about it slightly different. So.
I think a piece for me and what we train at Wellstone is that there are two types of coalitions. There are issues coalitions and there are values coalitions. And I think as organizers or advocates, we want everything to be a values coalition. You have to believe in everything I believe in all the time and with me 100% on everything. And you need that, actually, to set a political ideology and a pole to draw folks towards. But not every coalition is a values coalition. I'll say the Fair Courts Coalition is a values coalition. It's moved into changing the political center in the state of Kansas. I think that's great. But sometimes there are issues coalitions where you have strange bedfellows and you build relationships with people that you might not agree with on everything. And that's also important. Both are necessary. Both have different roles and functions, and understanding that there's a difference is incredibly important. Coming from the ACLU into the legislature, I had a lot of relationships with libertarian groups and libertarian legislators. And I rely on those relationships and those partnerships sometimes to move things that would generally be deemed unpassable otherwise. Law enforcement reforms that passed this year were done by the ultra-left and the ultra-right because we saw abuse of police power. And it was that kind of understanding of base motivations, core beliefs, and values that individual legislators hold and organizations hold, and recognizing that there was a time to leverage those relationships for an issue win. That's not the coalition I caucus with. I don't generally sit down with the libertarians and talk strategy about what we're going to move all the time. I understand that that's an issues coalition. My caucus, my Democratic caucus, is my values coalition inside the building. And I think when advocates understand there is a role and function of both, you can have an issues coalition that is short-term, temporary, that moves a specific issue forward, and then you can also have a values coalition, which is long-term, enduring, and builds governing power for the long term. That's an important acknowledgement to make.
And real quick, I just want to add, so the other piece of this that I think can't be missed is the importance of these national convenings and the national coalition, which we're all a part of. I mean, you know, I have had the great fortune of sitting on a couple panels with Melissa, and there's no better feeling than getting the email from, oh my God, I saw the clips today, hang in there, which happens, and then all of a sudden I'll be like, oh my God, I can't believe this is going on in your state. We'll see it here in our state next week. But that's really critical, and to take it a step further, so after we did our power map, after we figured out where our leveraging points are within the legislature, we really figured out where are our shortcomings within our coalition. So then we could go out and get those groups and start to build out our own coalition based around what will also advance our goal at the end of the day. But to that end, our partnership with Wellstone was critical. We realized we needed more diversity. We're a very white state. And so through a lot of Wellstone's relationships with various groups on the ground in Kansas, we were able to bring in that diversity within our coalition and bring in those different voices that haven't always been at this type of a table and say, no, actually, it's very important that you're here and we need your perspective. And it's for those reasons that we absolutely need you here, because you're not normally here. And so those things would not have happened without the national partnership. So shout out to the Justice at Stake staff and for all the folks that are here, because the coalitions play a huge dividends.
And on that, I just have a few more questions that I'm going to open it up. But you talked about some of the natural allies. Heard, you know, obviously ACLU, Common Cause, many of us just, you know, who work in these fields regularly. And Senator, you also spoke about, you know, the difference between the issues and the moral value coalitions. And so to the moral values, to what extent has there been an engagement within the faith community? I mean, there are differences, you know, there are opportunities there, I know, both right and left, to engage. And I'm just curious to what extent that has been of assistance in building the legislative champions, particularly when you're looking at you're doing the power mapping and trying to identify how you can get to people. I know that I know some definitely on the federal level, we're going to see, okay, we need to get the rabbis out, you know, again, you know, with you, and okay, we need to go get the archdiocese over here, and, you know, depending on what, you know, arena, you know, what, if they're of faith. So I'm just curious if that has been something of value.
Yes, and I think it goes to the larger organizing challenge. And I think most people don't see legislators as organizing targets or people that you have to know intimately as you would another person in your campaign or a voter you're trying to persuade on an issue. But it is exactly the same. And we often prescribe a value set and belief system onto legislators because they have an R or a D behind their name. And we might say, we know this person attends this church and they have been involved in this activity, therefore we know everything about them. And very rarely do we as advocates spend the time to sit down and have a real one-on-one conversation where we ask, what motivates you? Why do you do this work? How did you come into this space? And find commonality. And what we often find, and what I find with legislators regardless of partisan affiliation, is that we share some very similar core values that might manifest very radically different in policy ideas, but we can agree generally on the idea of fairness or generally on the value of equality. What that looks like in policy looks very different. I'm going to say that explicitly. But you actually have to understand where folks lie. There was a very conservative state senator in Colorado, the most conservative by every measure, and we had essentially written him off on criminal justice reform work. Until we had a one-on-one conversation with him, and he felt like for his faith and his belief in God, the one thing he knew to be true was that redemption was salvation, right? That people could sin and be saved, and that was his whole focus. And when we talked about juvenile justice reform, specifically eliminating life without the possibility of parole, he became one of our best champions. And no one expected it, but no one had a conversation with him about his core beliefs and how to use those beliefs in direction of a cause and vision for changing the state policies. Everyone presumed, oh, he's the far right guy, he's never going to be with us on anything. And in fact, he was one of the best champions in the state senate at the time.
That's great. Great. Any other comments? Well, let me ask this. I did hear a little bit about, well, you have a 4-point strategy in North Carolina because you got to defend it always, and I you know, assume that that's probably the case in other places as well. But Let's talk a little bit about the post-legislative strategy after you've been moving and trying to develop and work with the legislators. How do you maintain the relationship with the legislator? How can you use them moving forward? And what is your strategy afterwards?
Well, you have a coalition. You have a coalition of multi-issues, and these issues are going to, coalition partners issues are going to come up, and you can continue working as a coalition together. Whether it is on public financing, or disclosure, or merit selection. You can move and help your coalition partners deal with issues, like we did with the payday lending issue.
We've got two strategies: get on and hold on tight. No, in all seriousness, I think one of the key things that I'm acutely aware of as we're having these conversations with our lawmakers is understanding how it impacts them. I think one of the biggest shortcomings that we as advocates do is we go and ask all these really sometimes very difficult things of lawmakers, and we don't think through how they have to communicate back to their constituents. And so we all are justified. We've all got these great issues. We do wonderful things. But if your lawmaker has to take a hard vote, which in our case, they did, half or a third of our Republican caucus is against the governor openly on judicial issues, then how can we equip them with the tools to go back to their constituents and make the case? And that's really critical, and I cannot overstate that. What we do in this room is important, what we do in our state houses is important, but what those folks have to do when they go back into their districts is the most important, in my opinion, because most of them don't have staffs, most of them don't have that support. So then if we can then, I know Melissa does a lot of this in North Carolina, activating those networks locally to go and say, go to the pancake feed and they do a lot of mobilization of religious groups and having that support show up, or setting up a photo op at the school. That's not political. And so any C3 can do that, a C4 can do that, anybody can do that. But that's really important because a lawmaker has to get reelected.
And I want to say, I'm sometimes glib about this, but I live the luxurious life of being a state legislator, which means during session I have one part-time paid staff member who earns $10 an hour and can only work 20 hours a week. And everything else is either done by interns or myself. I schedule myself, I also work full-time, I have 2 kids and a husband. All of that takes a lot of time for me. And so when I work with partners, what I want from them inside and outside of the legislature is an ability to follow through. Because I am literally one person and sometimes a part-time person for 5 months out of the year. The rest of the time I'm on my own. And so there is a real opportunity and a real opportunity for failure in building this relationship. When you have legislators who say, here's this issue happening or transpiring in my district because I took this vote. Would you be willing to come to the town hall, talk about what we did or why we did it? And we don't hear back for 3 weeks when you have a staff of 20. And I'm sitting there by myself, emailing every day. I get frustrated. And it means that then I don't trust that you can follow through. And acknowledge that that's a limitation of legislators, but it's also an opportunity. Because what it means is that you can really step in to provide support in a way that is incredibly important, not just for the legislator, but for your issue. So if a legislator says, out of session, I want you to come and talk about what we did, that's a great opportunity for you to go show support for the legislator, but also do base building in that district. Have a sign-up sheet, talk to those folks who express concern, follow up with them, provide information, and actually take some of the burden off the shoulders of the legislator. It is incredibly challenging to do all of that work without the staff support that you need. The other thing is that when you are in this position of providing support, you can do the research, communications, policy development, and really have someone who is seen as a trusted partner. I have coalition partners that I work with all the time that if I call them, I know that they're going to get me the policy brief I requested, they're going to get me the messaging I requested, and they always follow through. I'm more naturally inclined to then continue working with them because I know they can deliver. And so just acknowledge that that's the lived reality for almost every legislator, state legislator in this country. They are under-resourced, understaffed, have very little time.
And real quick, just in a practical perspective, when you're fighting for valuable time in a lawmaker's schedule when they're in Topeka, in our example, You get 15 minutes, you get 30 minutes, you maybe get to chase them down as they're running to the bathroom in between committee meetings. But if you meet with them back in their district, you've got them. You've got them for a couple hours. Ben at Kansas Appleseed is here. He's one of our partners. He just came back from Western Kansas, from Garden City. There's nothing in Western Kansas. But the fact that he went out to those local districts to meet with those lawmakers is critical, because they see that it's not just give me, give me, give me. It's, okay, you're in our community and now you understand where we're coming from. And that's really important. And again, selfishly, you've got them for a couple hours usually.
And I want to wrap things up kind of on this initial session before we get to some of the outside questions. How do you think that, as we talked about all the variety of ways in which you're bringing people together through the coalitions, how can groups continue to be supportive of the champions after you've brought them to your issue, especially if they're being attacked? I mean, we know that there is a difficulty is real. And I'm curious to know what types of strategies or what you all have used or what your past practices are on trying to ensure that they stay with you, and that they can see that you are going to be with them regardless of what it is that they're bringing, what the attacks that they're getting from one side or the other.
I think that's a great question. I think that's a good place where we can honestly say that we've made a mistake. And in 2010, after the Citizens United decision, frankly, we were not prepared for the huge flood of outside spending and the campaign. We had TV ads running in North Carolina against our legislative champions, calling them out for, Legislator X is for welfare for politicians. Yes, those TV ads really did run. And we didn't have a response because we didn't have an infrastructure, a C4 infrastructure in place at the time to deal with that. We didn't have anything. We didn't even know how to message back against that. So, and moving forward, we've really had to, one, build that infrastructure, and two, learn how to message against, welfare for politicians.
And be prepared for it.
And be prepared for it.
Right.
And this isn't a perfect example, but when we were fighting the retention elections last time, what we did was we tried to be very aware of what our coalition partners could and couldn't do, and that allowed them to stay in their lane. So for example, our C3 partners that could not do any political engagement, they really pushed our Judicial Evaluation Commission findings and really went after the education side of things. Our C4s took a more aggressive stance, and then our PACs, of course, did direct action. And so it was really trying to build on the strengths of those coalition partners and understanding what their limitations are. They're still going to get attacked, but that's where we come back and and soothe our wounds and go from there. So,
and I would say there are the C3 thing. I just want to dispel the myth that C3s can't weigh in to provide cover for people who take tough votes. You can do that by writing a letter to the editor, penning any kind of earned media in support of the legislator's actions and why it was important for you as a coalition. All of those are C3 activities. You can do a legislative scorecard, also C3. You can do the C4 or 527 activities to provide cover like a TV commercial, radio ad. But the other thing that you can do, after you go home, you punch out of the clock, you could actually show up for a legislator and knock on a door. And I know that sounds odd, and that can be in your personal capacity, that can be as someone who says, you fought for us, I'm willing to go do that for you in my own individual time. That is such an unused time. Legislators often spend a lot of their time knocking on doors, talking to people in their districts. It's incredibly invaluable, not just to the legislator that you show up to help, but you also might get a sense of what their community looks like and the issues that they're hearing, and you might get a very different pulse than what the poll said about this issue. You might hear it come from the mouth of someone who says, I don't want to give welfare to those politicians, and you say, oh, you mean you don't want publicly financed campaigns, right? Or you could actually have a real conversation with someone and understand what their issue is. That's
a great point. Well, I want to get to some of the questions from the audience and see if were we able to collect anything here? It's fine. It's kind of early. It's Friday morning. Great, thanks. All right, so All right, so first question, what strategies have you used to reward elected officials who support the cause and awards local media in-home districts, etc.?
In North Carolina, we do something called the Sunshine Awards, where we go out and we, award legislators for kind of, their good disclosure, their good work, or, what do we call it? The Political Courage Award for standing up for our issue. And we go into those districts and we meet with them. And we do local letters to the editor and local media campaigns that say, Senator Apodaca stood up on our disclosure issue, and really, really, really pump that.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Great to hear. Any response?
Our email list has got about 20,000 folks in it, and we've mapped them across the state, and so we don't hesitate to honor and or shame lawmakers based on what their votes were. So, but the key there is making sure their local people understand what they've done for the cause.
I think all of that is great, and one thing that I've really appreciated as a legislator is really a handwritten note from an individual about why it was important we did what we did, or a story about why we did what we did. I have a bulletin board. Most legislators' offices is a mausoleum of awards that they win, and they don't remember the chicken dinner that it was or what the award was for. But if you get an actual note back about why this was important, how it was impactful, for me, I save those all on my bulletin board. They sit behind my desk, and when I have a crappy day and I just lost on everything because now I'm in leadership and we're in the minority, I'm like, oh God. I turn around, I'm like, I'm changing people's lives, it's okay, right? Like, it's good. And some of those very simple things take no time, very little money, and have a huge impact for legislators to know that they have people, real people behind them.
Yeah. Let's see. This is for you, Senator. When reaching out to community members, would holding a group meeting work better or having one-on-one meetings?
I think when you're approaching a legislator for the first time, it should be with a person who is trusted by the legislator, and that means that there's been a relationship built. And if you don't have that relationship and no one in your coalition has that relationship, spend the time to say, I want to sit down with you, I want to talk about your priorities, have no ask in the meeting, and actually treat it like an organizing 101, where you spend time learning what the legislator's district looks like, why they ran for office, who they are, what they care about, and have no ask in that meeting. And then your second meeting might be something like, I want you to come to an event and see something we're doing. We would love to have you there. We'd be honored if you would come. Thinking about relationship building and organizing with legislators is where I think most folks miss the opportunity, because they say, well, we just want you to take a vote. Well, to take a vote, you have to understand the motivations, their values. But when you make the first ask, it should be by someone who has a relationship, has spent time understanding who this person is, and that there is trust in that meeting. I think it can feel a little overwhelming to be asked to come to a meeting and there's 30 people in the room and they say, and you're going to be the person to do that. And if you're not prepared to do it, if you don't have the capacity or you really don't have the knowledge about that issue, you're not going to say that in front of a room, and it can create tension unnecessarily.
So basically, legislators are people too.
Yes.
Right? We need to get to know them. I'm going to kind of move on to the kind of the issue that we're talking, that we've been talking about throughout conference on merit selection. And the question is, how can we maintain momentum and interest in these long-term goals like merit selection? And I think that goes to kind of also the we talked about the post-legislative strategy, or just how it is you maintain that relationship. So how do you maintain that interest in this particular issue?
Well, in Kansas, we're a little bit fortunate in that.
Got an oxymoron there?
Yeah. The judicial issue is omnipresent. It never leaves our sight, because as I was writing a report, we're about to hit 5 separate constitutional crises in our state within the next 6 months. And so we don't have the luxury of not thinking about it. But in all seriousness, it's continuing to make the case to our coalition partners why they need to stay focused, because they've got their own set of issues, why that's important, and then have them continue to reach out to their lawmakers that they've got really good relationships to, and then continuing that conversation past the legislative session.
I think small incremental change is like how you keep your folks engaged. Okay, in North Carolina, we can't win on public financing right now, but you know what? We can win on disclosure. So we're passing small incremental disclosure changes to help continue to engage our groups and feel like they've accomplished something.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. I know oftentimes, and again, kind of relating back to on the federal level, these, obviously we talk about the Congress right now and how we don't really do anything, but there are the things that we don't want them to do. So oftentimes I know that we within coalitions are struggling with, okay, we need to feel good about something, or how to keep people engaged. I think that's a great point of just the incremental change. We kind of remind ourselves that, all right, you know, we didn't lose that battle, that's a good thing. You know, we stopped this right here, and remember that those are, I think that that's a good point to raise and to let people know that it's not the immediate, I think, satisfaction of that win is not always going to exist, but you can have that long-term goal of actually trying to achieve long-term change. And I think that's we definitely need to acknowledge that and appreciate that.
Well, I think that's right, and I needed to be reminded of that not long ago. So I'm kind of a type A OCD, go get a jump in 2 feet, and so if I'm not always moving forward, I feel like I'm sinking, and that's not the case. I had one of our partners say, let's just take a step back and realize that even though we're not technically advancing the ball, we're not losing ground, and that is a victory in our current environment in Kansas. That is a major victory, and the fact that we have been so successful to this point, we are shooting way above our weight class as a coalition, and we're holding all those folks together, and that is a victory. And so I would just offer that even if you're not getting your law passed, victory looks very different at different times of the movement, and keeping an eye on that has been critical for me.
That's a great quote. So can I write that down and we can put that out? Victory looks very.
Absolutely.
No, I think that's great. That's great great phrase. Go ahead.
One piece I want to add in here is I think it's easy for us to lose an opportunity when we lose. And so what I want to point out here is that most of us in this room probably are type A. We are overachievers. We're here in a conference talking about the nerdiest issue in the country, right? And we love it. I know folks were at the bar until 1 debating whether or not the judicial system can be eradicated in Kansas or not, right? We're kind of overachievers. And so we don't like to lose. But I want us to be comfortable with the idea of losing, because a loss frame is much more impactful than a win frame. When we win something, it's done, it's checked off our list, and as type A people, we say it's done, we move to the next thing. Automatically, there's another thing on our list. But when we lose something, we get pissed off, we get angry, we get agitated, and that energy can be lost if you aren't ready to use it. So when you lose on an issue in Kansas, or you lose on an issue in Colorado or North Carolina, that's a great organizing moment to say, see, we need to do better. What are we going to do next? How do we make it happen? Instead of just saying, oh my God, I'm defeated, I'm deflated, I'm going to walk away. And I think oftentimes, because we are type A people, we say, oh my God, we were defeated. We want to sink back in our chairs. And that's the time to jump up. An example for that is in my first term, I helped pass the driver's licenses program for undocumented folks in Colorado. It took a lot of political capital. We had support from law enforcement, from folks in criminal justice and immigrant communities. And when we lost the majority in the Senate, one of the first actions of the Republican majority this year was to defund the program. And I had been telling folks for months, we need to be prepared for implementation. We need to work on this. And all of our coalition partners were celebrating the win. They were doing the victory lap. And I was saying, guess what? It's not going to be that easy. Come on, come on, come on. And as soon as a program was defunded in the first month of this legislative session, our coalition has tripled in size. We have more sheriffs willing to talk about the importance of the program, right? And it was because we were ready to use the loss, use that opportunity to build. And so don't be afraid of those moments. It sucks, it stings, but guess what? That's when you're going to have the best momentum, maybe to give the biggest punch.
Yeah, well, we're seeing that right now play out in a larger arena in terms of the South Carolina and Confederate flag coming down. So, yeah.
And I just want to steal, she hasn't said it yet, but I steal it and use it a lot. Melissa has a term, shake and bake. And it allows, when you lose, it frees you up to start shaking. And that allows the other folks to start baking internally the policy. But it's a whole lot more fun to shake.
It is.
Yeah. And it's doing a lot more shaking after you lose. Like, all right, here we go.
I mean,
Gloves
that's
are off.
exactly how the Moral Monday movement in North Carolina was born. You know, like Jessie said, we took all that energy from those losses, and we got out there. We got all of our groups organized and together, and we created a movement.
Mm-hmm. Well, I have one last question, and I'm going to wrap this up. I want you all to give we'll let you answer this question and maybe give a few closing remarks for the audience. So the last question is, how do advocates push for constitutional amendments that require a legislative referral when legislators fear the voters will reject the issue, specifically merit selection? It's a very deep question.
Very specific. What I would say, and what I say often in groups, is that it depends, and that's what I will close out with. You should be thinking about building a strategy that is specific to your state and working with individual legislators. It may be possible for you to move a constitutional amendment, but you have to know where folks are, you have to know what their motivations are, and you have to be willing to work with them to define the strategy. And so what I would say is, generally, legislators are willing to say, this is an issue that's so important the voters should decide, and that's an easy message and frame to use. But in general, we don't know because we don't know your states. You do. You're the experts. And if you need help planning that out, that is my job at Wellstone Action. I can come to your state, I can go to your town, I can help you think through what does a strategy look like, and that's in partnership with Justice at Stake and with everyone here. So we are around, myself and Karen is in the back. If you have any questions about the work that we do, we'd be happy to sit down with you and talk about what it might look like for your state.
Great. Ryan?
I would just add, I think that's exactly right, and be flexible in being able to change that strategy up. I know that, especially when Justice at Stake or Wellstone comes into Kansas, initially they were like, wait, you want to do what? I'm like, no, really, trust us. And now, you know, they help refine those points. But I think just being flexible, you know, everything changes, and everything changes hour to hour sometimes in the legislative session, so.
I think dealing with those harsh realities in North Carolina, you know, merit selection has been talked about, but we know the people of North Carolina are not going to give up that right to vote for their judges. It's too ingrained in what is North Carolina. So, you know, having that as an understanding and realizing that maybe that isn't an option. Well, what can we do? You know, we've passed retention elections in North Carolina. Well, what can we do with this? Well, can we put judicial public financing on the back end of retention elections? Yes, we can. Can we build a pipeline to create diversity in our court systems by applying judicial public financing to the Court of Appeals? Yes, we can.
Mm-hmm. Well, I want to thank each of you. This was a great discussion, and I do appreciate the time and the commitment you all have and the work that you're doing. And I hope that all of you all will take advantage of this expertise up here, and please give everybody a round of applause. Thank you. Oh, yeah, of course. Epilogue.
Keep fighting. Keep fighting, keep fighting. This is so discouraging, and all of us are operating in different fronts on the merit issue and the judicial issue, from finance to everything, but keep fighting. What we're doing is so important, and it is changing lives, and it is protecting lives, and what you do matters. So keep that in mind, especially when those days are scary and down.
So we're headed into a break here, folks. Thanks very much, Tanya, and all of our panelists. Great job. What Ryan said at the end, yes, let's do that. Melissa and Ryan, one of the things that's great about having them here is they've been talking to us for a couple of years, and as their work has grown and changed and deepened, so have the lessons they've been sharing with us, and it's just terrific to hear that. And I also wanted to say to the Senator, thank you very much. Also note that Wellstone is a summit leader, our highest level of sponsors. When organizations sponsor the summit, it really helps us put it on and develop a great program for you, so we're very grateful for that. And, okay, I want to encourage everybody who's here for the first time today, and I said this last night, to stay this afternoon for Law, Justice, and the Holocaust, How the Courts Failed Germany, which is an amazing program put on by Dr. Meineke from the Holocaust Museum. And then one last thing before I let you go on the break, and then we'll come back for the plenary at 10:15. I've been the leader of my daughter's Girl Scout troop for the last 9 years, and we have this little song, make new friends, keep the old, one is silver and the other is gold. Okay, if yesterday was a gold friend day, people, today is the silver friend day. Make new friends, mix it up, sit with somebody you don't know. Seriously, this is a chance to make important connections for our work in the coming months and years. So thanks very much. We'll see you back in 15.